Hello, fifth graders. I am back with chapter 5 of our book, Escape from Alcatraz. So, a couple of you told me that you have the book as well. And so, if you've been reading ahead, don't spoil it for anyone because I'm not reading ahead. So, all right, so this chapter 5 is called Logistics of the Bay. So, the bay is where the prison was located in a little inlet off the ocean on the coast of California. Since Alcatraz became a federal penitentiary in 1934, there had been 13 previous escape attempts. Some, such as the Battle of Alcatraz, had been violent. Others were sneaky. None were successful. Most of the men involved were recaptured. 6 were shot dead. 2 men escaped the prison in 1937, but drowned trying to swim from the island to the mainland. These previous failed attempts left most prisoners hopeless that they could ever flee the Rock. But not the Anglins, West, and Morris. The Anglin brothers were ready to break through the vents and make a run for it, but the more patient and intelligent Morris realized that previous escapees had put a lot of thought into getting out of the prison, but they had underestimated the difficulty of getting off the island. They needed a solid plan to get across the 1.25 miles of ocean between the island and the mainland. The men faced 2 problems. First, they would need a way to cross the frigid, churning water without drowning or freezing. Second, they would need to get out of the area in a hurry without being noticed. If you're soaking wet and wearing a prison uniform, you tend to attract attention. Attention was something they did not want. To solve the first problem, they decided to build rafts. The Anglin brothers had some experience with boats from their youth in Florida, and J.W. had learned from a magazine article how to work with a rubber to shape and seal it. Clarence Carnes later took credit for finding a Sports Illustrated article that showed how to build a safe, inflatable boat. He got it to West as soon as he found it. The article also described several hand-operated pumps for inflating rafts. One of them looked very much like a concertina, an instrument similar to an accordion. Frank Morris ordered a concertina, and it arrived a few days later. Since he already had the accordion, the hacks didn't think it was unusual that he took a sudden interest in the new instrument. It just seemed as if his love of music was growing. He was able to remove the musical keys and rig the instrument to act as a bellows or a raft inflator. J.W. was able to swipe raincoats from the supply room on rainy days during his job. He started his shift without a coat and grabbed one during his shift. The guard on duty at the end of his shift was different from the guard who was on duty at the beginning of it. He didn't know that J.W. had not been wearing a raincoat when he started. He began to swipe a raincoat every day, and sometimes 2 a day, wearing one beneath the other. At night, he pulled out the grill in his own cell, which was now completely free, and left the coats for Morris. By this time, Morris had opened his door all the way and had been in the utility corridor. In the dark of night, he had climbed up a series of plumbing pipes to the top and checked out the ventilator shaft, which he reported had bars that they would have to break through. He also noticed that the convicts on the other side of the utility corridor were watching the men. They lay on the floor and peered through their own vents as the men dug at their doors and later climbed through. The men remembered Bumpy Johnson's promise that the inmates in his cell block would not rat them out. But it made them very nervous to have so many convicts aware of what was going on. Somebody was bound to talk, or even accidentally reveal the information. There was nothing to be done about it, though. They simply had to trust Bumpy. As for the second issue, that of getting out of the area as quickly as possible, nobody knows for sure how or if they solved it. Considering the great care they took with every other step of the escape, they must have planned something. In later interviews, Clarence Carnes claimed he believed that Bumpy Johnson played a role here. Johnson still had plenty of contacts outside of Alcatraz, and it was said that he could get things done. Big things. Carnes said he noticed Alan West talking to him several times leading up to the escape. On one side of the recreation yard was a set of wide, rising steps. They were sort of like concrete bleachers that rose up from the floor of the yard to a beige wall at the top. Inmates could sit on these bleachers and watch the handball and softball games, or just watch everything that went on in the yard. But there were unspoken rules. Only convicts with the highest ranking, cons who were feared and respected more than the others, could sit on the highest steps. From there, they could see the Golden Gate Bridge and the skyline of San Francisco across the bay. One man, often found on the top step, was Bumpy Johnson. There, he played chess with other inmates, often Clarence Carnes. It wasn't wise to approach Bumpy on the top step without permission. Anyone who went up that high unapproved would pay a price within days. He would find himself stabbed or at least badly beaten. According to Carnes, Allen West sought permission and was granted it. Was Bumpy Johnson so well connected that he could arrange for a boat to pick up the men? Many authorities on the escape didn't think so. Besides, would he stick his neck out for 4 white men? Black and white men did not always get along well in the 1960s, and for the most part they kept to their own groups. On top of that, Allen West was known as a racist and an agitator. He was often involved in fights between whites and blacks. On the other hand, there was a code of loyalty among prisoners on the Rock. According to Clarence Carnes, if Bumpy could do something to help the men, he would. Frank Morris was also busy during his time in the recreation yard. Each day when he went outside, he made his way toward the area where the black convicts gathered. In the cell blocks, the warden had the convicts separated by race. In the yard, they didn't have to be separate, but the black and white men tended to stick to their own groups. Morris wasn't there to socialize. In fact, he stood alone, staring off into the distance. It looked like he was simply daydreaming, but if you followed his gaze, you would see that he was looking out over the wall to the top of the cell house. He was casing the roof. There was the rain hood over the ventilation shaft they planned to climb through. At the side of the building was a vent pipe from the kitchen that ran down to the ground. They could shimmy down that pipe to get off the roof. None of the guard towers offered a good view of that area, and Morris gauged how much twine they would need to lower their raft and other supplies. Meanwhile, Allen West was sewing in his cell at night. He removed the sleeves from raincoats and formed them into life preservers, which he sewed together with string, sealing the seams with rubber cement and tape. He had removed his grill vents so that he could stash his sewing supplies and the life preservers in the utility corridor, but he did not widen up his door yet. He worried that once he removed that much concrete, he would not be able to disguise the hole. With the grill out, he could reach into the corridor freely, but he could not fit his body through. It would be a simple job to kick out the weakened concrete until it was wide enough to fit through, which he would do on the night of the escape. And with so many of the details now being taken care of, that night began to feel very real and very near. And that was the end of that chapter, so we'll see what happens next.